Good morning, everyone. Good morning and welcome. I'd like to welcome you this morning to the Hennepin History Museum. My name is Pam Moore, and I am the president of the board here at the museum, and just wanted to say how excited we are to have you here this morning, but also how excited we are to have this new exhibit here, The Bond Between Us, and to welcome our guest this morning to talk about his experience with putting this exhibit together for all of you, but all of the community to come in and see. So after you hear from Daren this morning, I want you to go out and tell everyone you know to come in and see this exhibit, because we're so excited to have him here to share with us, but then also just excited to have this exhibit here because of the message that it shares, but then also the history that it shares about our community. And then to have John here to just share with all of you to get the story out of Daren. So welcome, we're excited you're here. We're excited about this exhibit because I think it continues to tell the story that we have been telling here at the museum for a while about the history of South Minneapolis and Black families. And so please welcome Daren and John for getting this kicked off this morning. So thank you.
Thank you, Pam. Again, I'm John Crippen, the director of the museum here. So delighted to have you here, Daren.
Thank you.
We're excited about your exhibit. Just as kind of a warm-up question and getting everybody in tune, can you tell us about your background and how you came to be an artist? What's your story on that?
I guess so. I got to take it back here. I think I credit some of my earliest childhood memories as I come from a big family. I have 10 brothers and sisters. My father has 10 brothers and sisters, so a lot of my early childhood was spent at family gatherings. And I remember specifically going into my grandfather's basement and kind of exploring his darkroom that he had there. And he passed away before I really got to really appreciate and understand our relationship. So there's a lot of questions that I had about his life that I didn't know, but it always in the back of my mind, it was always seeing the darkroom and that smell of the chemicals, and then just seeing him as this kind of mystic man. And then even going further back, I think in hindsight, my dad took me to my first art museum in St. Louis. He bought me an Escher print of the two hands, and I think that kind of inspired me to doodle. All throughout elementary school, I was, drawing on things. I remember going to Burroughs, and they built these portables, and they had the special class for, I guess, gifted and talented artists. So I got pulled out and did that for a year, and so it's always kind of been in my life. I just kind of ignored it, I thought music was the artistic expression that I was supposed to be doing. So, I've always loved music. My stepmother actually worked at Paisley Park for a while, and Prince gave me my first art kit. So all of these things have been prevalent, but again, I was thinking music was what I was supposed to be doing. So fast forward to the early 2000s, after graduating from high school, I started working in some studios around the Twin Cities and just kind of shadowing the engineers and the producers and the musicians. Again, thinking music is what I wanted to do. But while I was doing that, I was always drawing on things, and the musicians would come in and say, "Oh, it'd be really cool if you could design me a tattoo. You could do this or you could do that." But again, just kind of ignored it. Life kind of kept going, and then I ended up moving out to New York, and that's where I think I really started to listen to my voice and my calling, doing something with art. I started to meet emerging artists that were selling work on the street in New York, and built a relationship specifically with an artist named Bobby Hill, and that we just started a conversation because my great uncle's name is Bobby Hill. So I joked with him, "Oh, we could be related," and yada, yada, yada.
Mm-hmm.
And then fast forward maybe 6 months to a year, I was working on Wall Street at a Starbucks as a manager, and a creative director for a magazine, the Source magazine, came in, and he had Bobby Hill's art. He was doing a write-up on him, and I recognized it, and he was impressed that I knew who this artist was. I guess they had a relationship. And the following day, he came back in with his portfolio of like all the things that he had shot, all the covers for the different magazines he's worked on, and he asked me my opinion, and I gave it to him. And then before he left, I was like, do you need any more help? And he said, yes, come to my office the next day. I got off work, and then I went there. And again, right, this is all music. I'm thinking it's still music. So I did interviews, and I started as an intern. Then I worked my way up to a contributing writer. And while I was a contributing writer, I was interviewing different musicians, but I realized that that really wasn't like what was making me happy or feel fulfilled. So I switched gears and I started interviewing artists and find artists and different artists that I knew and had met. And then that's where it kind of dawned on me, like, there's something here, you know, you need to just do this. So then I applied for school in New York and started working in a gallery in Tribeca, all while just kind of painting, keeping like my paintings to myself, not really showing it. But then I was working on a show, and a bunch of artists kept saying MCAD. Oh, have you heard of MCAD, or the Minneapolis College of Art and Design? And I'm like, no, I haven't. So I did my little Google research, right? And it was right about the time where I was graduating, and it was like, what's next? It was like either go to Cooper Union or RISD or MCAD, this elusive school that these artists kept telling me about. So I applied to MCAD, and they offered me a pretty good scholarship to come back, and I accepted it, and my family and I moved back, and ever since then I've just been kind of, you know, put the wheels to the pavement and been kind of running. So
cool.
Yeah.
Are you still making music, or is that now the art that stays behind and you don't share?
That's kind of the art that stays behind and doesn't get, you know, it's just uncomfortable for me. I don't think that being a musician, or like, I like being home. I'm kind of like a homebody, so I feel like being a creative and being behind like even a camera or a paintbrush, it allows me to kind of be more introverted and just let the expression happen and then give it to the world to take. Whereas in music, you have to be more vulnerable, and you have to put yourself out there, and it's a game of popularity, it felt like. So for me, that isn't it. I don't want to be popular. I just want to be myself. If you like me, great. I still love you even if you don't like me. So I think being an artist fits me better, you know, in the more traditional sense with painting, being a muralist, and working with community to create the art that I do.
Yeah. So from an early age, you had these formations in your grandfather's darkroom.
Yeah.
Tell us how this evolved into inspiration for the exhibit upstairs.
Well, in like summer of 2016, maybe fall of 2016, right before 2017, my grandfather's brother, my uncle David, and my uncle Robert, they had been going through this work, and they called me and were like, hey, we have been trying to sort through this work. Will you give us a hand? And I didn't know what that meant at the time. They came with a trailer full of work, a trailer like, you know, bins and boxes and loose work and equipment. And I was like, oh, okay, you really need help. So I was going to school at the time and creating and selling my own work, but I had this stuff, and I would just slowly, you know, after projects or in between, you know, school, I'd kind of sift through it and just kind of try to salvage the work that wasn't like damaged by water or just age. So it was really just a process of me separating the photos to try to keep it. But you know, I knew my grandfather did photography, but I didn't know the extent of it. So I guess this project kind of started, was like, oh, it'd be cool to digitize this. So then I was just taking photos that I found that were cool, putting it on social media. And I was like, it'd be really cool one day to do a show with this. And Seth Goodspeed reached out to me and was like, oh, it'd be really cool if you talked to the curator here. And I did. And then even in our initial conversations, you know, I was like, oh, my grandfather's a photographer. My father does photography. I do it in a different way, but I do photography. And it would be cool to create a show about it, but I still didn't have it visualized right. And I think that what's cool about this show is that it kind of all happened organically, right? It just, the bond kind of presented itself, right? I credit my father and my grandfather for planting those seeds of, artistic creativity in me, and then having to work and sitting on it. It all just kind of happened organically. I didn't really have to do much, even some of the stuff that's in the shows, like the photo of Angela Davis, that I found much later after I had started scanning the stuff here. Going through it, I was like, well, let me just go back and just double check this bin. And then I would find things, so.
I love serendipity as part of historical research process. It's often when you're not looking for something, you find the really cool stuff.
And I think one day I was even in here scanning documents, and there was somebody else working on a film in the little lab downstairs. And they were like, oh, I asked them about a photo because they seemed like they knew or they had old archives. And they're like, well, why don't you just Google it? So, I kind of did that. And I think that's when I discovered like the Angela Davis photo and the Jesse Jackson photo that's in the exhibit. So it's like he had all of this really cool stuff that I was just sitting on, and it, kind of presented itself as I was trying to curate the collection,
Cool. And I think we should say that your father's here in the audience today, right?
Yep.
So when we get into Q&A, maybe we'll give you a chance to say a few words as well. But tell us more about your grandfather and his career, his role in the community. Tell us about his life as a photographer.
It's all kind of come to me from different stories or secondhand. It's my understanding that he worked for the Board of Education and was like an active community member in South Minneapolis, especially around like the Sabathani, Central Green neighborhood. And it's my understanding that he just always had a camera on him. It was just one of those people that would have a camera and would just shoot. And I was talking to my aunt and, who came to the opening, and she mentioned that like he did it in a way where you wouldn't even know that he took your picture. He would get up on you and take the photo so smoothly and then just fade off into doing what he did. So yeah, it's just my understanding that it was just always something. And I kind of wish that I, had the chance to kind of pick his brain more and understand the process and how he was developing it. But it just seemed like, well, it's evident from the amount of work that he has and that I have, that I think I only dusted the surface of it.
Yeah.
That he was just prolific. It was just something that he always did.
But he didn't actually earn a living from it. He had other jobs, and this was just an avocation.
I think he worked for the Board of Education, and that was primarily how he made his living. But it's my understanding that after he retired, he did have a studio, and I know that he was part of a couple different artist collectives of black photographers throughout the Twin Cities. There's one of them here that knows my grandfather and had shot with my grandfather. So it's my understanding that he was always involved in the arts, and I think that later on in life he had a studio and was shooting stuff. I know that towards the end of his life, I think he was working with a woman that had a fashion line, so a lot of the photos that he had in his collection were of people posing or modeling for this fashion line. He did stuff for different businesses. I guess time and space. There was a photo that I found. It looked like there was a black-owned business that had their license or something that he was taking photos of. And even my cousin, after the fact, the show opened, I just kind of talking to him about my grandpa. I know that he would go around and like shoot different businesses and then put his work in the different businesses around South Minneapolis. So it seems like it was always kind of prevalent in his life.
Always there.
Yep.
I feel anyway a romance with the dark room and that whole process of creating photos as they used to be. Do you have any nostalgia for that, or are you happy to live in the digital age and just be able to snap things? Like, would you ever go back and do that old process?
I have done some darkroom stuff. It's very limited. I like I kind of like it because you have to think about how you're shooting, right? With the digital camera, you just take, right? And you can take 1,000 photos in a day, and then you go back and sift through it. So
Not as
like,
much.
it's like a yes and no.
Yeah.
I like it in the fact that you have to be more technical. You have to think about your shot. I like the fact that like with more analog, darkroom stuff, you get sometimes richer photos. But then with digital, you're able to do more, right? Like I can take the photo and have it live in a whole other realm that you can't do digitally. So I think eventually, you know, I could see myself marrying the two together, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Cool. One of the concepts that people see in the exhibit upstairs is that you see this exhibit and this intergenerational work
Yep.
as a living Sankofa.
Yep.
Can you tell us about that process or that concept a little bit and how you think about that in your life?
Yeah, so the Sankofa is it's an Adinkra symbol in the Ghanaian culture that kind of represents like the past, present, and future. So for me, when I say it's like a living Sankofa, I'm looking back to my past and using that to kind of create what I'm doing now in the present, right? It's a way for me to honor my past in the present, but also plant seeds to the future, which is, you know, the creation of new work from the past work, but all being in the present. So I call it like the living Sankofa because I'm honoring the past in the present, but also planting seeds and moving forward into the future.
Nice. So what was it like with all of these family stories and memories rushing over you as you tried to make sense of it all and pull this stuff together?
I think it's been a very like draining process, to be honest. Not in like a bad way, in the sense where it's like, oh, I can't do this anymore. But you know, like I said, there was like questions that I had about my grandfather's life, or you hear stories, you hear about how prolific he was as a photographer, but then to have his body of work and actually see it for yourself and actually be able to like hold it and work with it, right? It kind of brings you closer, but it also opens up so many more questions, right? And it kind of like, in a sense, like, I filled that void, but it kind of created like a new void, right? Like it created a new longing to really want to be in the dark room with him and to want to go out and just kind of be like a fly on the wall when he was shooting and to really understand like what he was thinking when he was doing that. So in that aspect, that was hard, but then it was very like affirming for me to be able to work with like my father's work and his work, and again, like just being, you know, especially since I think as an artist now, I credit them for planting those seeds. So to be able to do that, it's been kind of like a tug and pull, right? Like I've had to like, there's been times where even doing the process, you know, I'd get done scanning the photos, I'd be here for a couple hours, but I'd literally just have to go home and couldn't think about anything because it would, you know, be so much to process. Or again, you know, you find photos of these famous people and you're like, whoa, it just blows your mind. And even going back, I found a signed letter from Jesse Jackson thanking my grandfather for his contributions to his campaign. So obviously it wasn't just a one and done thing. He did something more to get that, or maybe it was a generic thing. But either way, it's like you find these cool things and it's like artifacts in time, right? Like you, almost like a mental excavation of whatnot. Or
Yeah. So share with us a little bit how you made those tough decisions you've got thousands and thousands of images, and how did you select what was ultimately in the exhibit?
I mean, I kind of cherry picked it as I was sorting through things. Like I was like, oh, this is a really cool photo. Selfishly, I set it aside. So I kind of knew like some of his photos needed to be shown, but I think again, it all kind of presented itself. I think the biggest thing for me was the narrative piece, right? Like there was so much work between myself, my father, my grandfather, that's the easy part, right? Like it was there, the work was there. I think the hard part was finding the narrative, or like how I can tell it or tie it all together. And then once I figured that part of it out, it was pretty easy. It was like, okay, I knew that I wanted to focus it on these cultural landscapes, the portraits and the people, and then I kind of built from there. And then some were just like clear, like, you know, how could I not have a photo of Angela Davis in the exhibit? Or it just, you know, some of them were just shot in a way where it was just so beautiful, like it just felt kind of almost, I refer to photographs sometimes as being painterly. Again, this is me being a visual artist. I look at it as like a composition, and I think of it as a painting. So some of it was like, oh wow, these are just too good not to put in. So I think for me, it was getting the narrative piece down and then putting the images that felt right together, and then kind of even looking at it from the sense, right? I talk about the bond between us. So thinking about like how we're shooting, right? My grandfather was shooting in the 90s when it was all the digital era. My father and I, we shoot with digital cameras, but again, we never communicate with each other. I mean, very limited. I think maybe when I took a photography class, I talked to my dad briefly, or like I got my camera and he helped me with my settings. But you know, like, oh, well, you should change this to get richer shots. So that was the extent of it, but we're never really talking to each other about how we're shooting, or we're never, you know, sometimes photographers, they go out in groups and they shoot the same things, but we get different perspectives. So we weren't really doing that, but even the subjects or how we were shooting it or placing it in the frame or the lighting, I noticed these bonds. So then that kind of also sifted it. And then to be honest, the big factor was time. You know, I could have spent so much time trying to like narrow it down that it just became, I just have to cut it off. I just have to be done. So,
yeah. I think you've started to touch on this a little bit, at least from my perspective inside a history museum, but how is this different than just creating a regular gallery show that you might do? Did that help or put pressure on creating that narrative and interpretive stuff? Or?
Yeah, it definitely put pressure on it. I think with a traditional gallery setting, right, and with art, it's all kind of subjective. So I can hang a photo or something that I've created on a wall and just tell you like the materials that I created with it and the dimensions and maybe a title, right? But then with visual art, as the viewer, you give it that power and you give it that interpretation and that meaning and that context, right? So at least that's how I like to create my art. Even a lot of my work is untitled. I very rarely title a work because then I feel like I'm telling the viewer what they need to be seen, and I don't like to do that. I think that like it again should be subjective, and I think that like with me and the art that I create, I hope that it brings you some joy. It's about like, I think that it's very gestural and feeling, so it's never like theme based. So there's some themes that I have in there, but we'll get into that, you know, in a minute.
Yeah.
But I think that like it was different because with a regular gallery, I can let the art be, but now I had to kind of like break down my thought process, and you know, here I am talking like I've done this a million times, right? But I hate it, you know, I don't like it. I told, John asked me, he was like, do you want to see the questions before? I was like, no, we can just ask me. So again, I think that like, that's just reflective of me as a creative, right? Like, yes, I can speak to it, and I hope that I'm articulating myself well, but it always feels like I'm not. So
yeah,
I think that's the challenge, right? It was like, you gotta do it. And
so let's dive into the original artworks that you did. As part of this exhibit, we commissioned 4 works for Daren to make. I always think of it as in conversation with photos. You might have a different way of describing it, but tell us about like how you got into that process of creating these 4 new pieces of art.
I think that kind of like, so how I do photography is I take images of like textures or things, and then I put it into a computer and use it for a new composition. So it becomes like a secondary piece of a composition that I'm working on. So I've already done that already, these kind of like digital collages that I've said, but with this exhibit, it allowed me to kind of flush that idea out more and really like kind of sit with it and then make it more of a mixed media aspect. So it was just finding, like, I used kind of the images that my father had and then my grandfather had as like the base or like the main kind of focal point in it, in the composition. But then I created and added like how I do art to it to create these new compositions. So it's almost like that seed. If you look at the Sankofa bird, a symbol, he has like a seed in his mouth, right? So I think of these like these new works as that seed. So,
So how did you choose the subjects? Like, or is that even too hard to describe? Is it just happen?
it kind of happens organically, you
Yeah.
know, like I'll take an image and then I'll separate an element from like, so say it's like the photo of the men around the circle, right? If you guys haven't seen the exhibit yet, it's going to be hard to kind of picture what I'm talking about, but bear with me.
Is this the drummer's circle?
Yep.
Okay.
So it started with that, right? That photo alone of the men is like a powerful image. So I separated them and then kind of placed them in the center, but then I got to thinking about like the different themes and like what that means. You know, that's a part of their culture. So then I added like different words and different elements into it to kind of expand onto the image. And then I kind of treat it like a painting. I don't, again, I kind of have an idea, right? Or I kind of know like a color palette, or I have little elements that I'm like, I really want to use this. But I don't see the whole picture before I create it. It kind of just happens, and it's more of like a feeling-based thing. So and like a puzzle, right? I'm kind of like adding little things, or like, you know how chefs sometimes they have a recipe, but they're adding, it's like feeling, right? You don't necessarily measure how much sugar you're putting in it, but it just feels right. That's kind of how I was creating it, and then like it gets to a point where I'm like, okay, this is good, and then I stop, and then sometimes I'd add a little bit more, and I'm like, oh shoot, I should have done that. I just ruined the piece. So then it's like I got to go back to the drawing board. So it's kind of like, you know, just it's a feeling base, and then some of it, you know, just to me, it's like I just gotta, like, it's all about like stopping. Sometimes like I'm a perfectionist, and I can go on and on and on and go down a rabbit hole, but I just have to just come out for light and be content and let it just be.
Yeah. So I know you told us that you don't like to tell us what things mean, but I'm gonna go there anyway, because I'm a literal history guy and I need some help with the art. I was struck over and over in those artworks, your treatment of eyes.
Yes.
And I was shocked a little bit, like you're Xing people's eyes out, and I'm like, ooh, that seems a little aggressive. You're putting gold leaf on eyes. So tell us about the eyes and what you were working on with that.
Yeah, I mean, well, let me first clarify, the X's on the eyes aren't anything sinister, okay? I think that like me and the eyes, especially, right, that like, that cliche saying, right? It's like the window to your soul, but I do believe that, right? The eyes tell a lot about how a person's feeling, what they've been through, what they're going through. So it tells like a story, right? It gives you a glimpse into a person. So for me, the eyes are important. So a lot of the times you'll see in my art, like if it's an eye, that I will put like a box around it or something, or I'll even like label it like eye, because a lot of like my own art talks about, or like it's like my identity, or this exploration of like why we have this need to commodify our culture and live in this age where we got to monetize ourselves, right? Instead of just existing. So I think that for me, like especially the eyes, like it's a telltale thing. So I do little things like that to kind of like remind people of that. But then when I say I, it's like literally like I, like your identity, right? You or whoever that subject is. It's it becomes like a window into it, or like almost like a mirror. So as you're looking at it, it's like if it's a person in the image, it becomes your eye.
Yeah. So you don't have to tell us what things mean, but what else should we be looking for? Are there other symbols or themes in your art that we should like, oh, let's think about that a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, oftentimes, like in the work that I do, there'll be like little, almost like a hangman thing, but I look at that more as like, again, like an anchoring into not only the past, being biracial, and then I won't put the words mankind, but it's also to like have viewers understand that we have, all right, so a hangman thing, right? That's a pretty like morbid thing, right? So I oftentimes don't finish out the word mankind, or I'll put kind man, because I want us to understand that we need to have some fragility with ourselves, right? The hangman's never the full figure, it's only part of it, and there's usually tally marks to show that we're going through things and to show compassion, right? I never have it filled out, but even the words in the hangman spell out mankind. So I want us to be compassionate with each other and to understand that oftentimes we are pretty harsh with one another, and that we need to slow it down. Or, for instance, I write like, instead of human, I write hued man in my work. So you'll see that in one of the pictures. It says hued man on the side of it. And that again is just coming back to the fact that we're all hued, right? Regardless of my, me being biracial and identifying as a black man, or being a person of color, right? Doesn't matter. It does matter. No, sorry. What I'm trying to say is that we're all human. We're all hued, right? We all have a hue to us. So again, it's honoring, my identity, but also trying to appeal to the compassion of humanity, right? That we are all hued. And when I say hued, it's not just our complexion, it's our experiences, our journey, and our path that we're on. So these are all our hues and all of our spectrums that make us who we are.
Cool. Are these kind of themes and elements in the works upstairs, are these kind of a continuation of things you've been doing for a while, or is this a new direction that you've taken? And
it's themes, they're reoccurring themes, but I think what this show has allowed me to do is understand why I was making those choices and why I was having these conversations in my art, right? Like, I never really, a lot of the work I create, like I said, is based on identity, or these questions I have of like why we commodify our culture, but I didn't understand why I was doing that. And then I think now this exhibit has given me an anchor and a place to really be able to like articulate those choices that I've been doing all along. And it's almost given like my work now a new life and like a new purpose, right? Like, I think that what I've been doing has been like a living Sankofa. Even if you look at some of the murals that I created, the first mural that I did in the Twin Cities was for a Somali-owned daycare. And it was having an issue with graffiti, right? I use aerosol art, but I brought in other graffiti artists to help with the creation of the mural. So I'm never going into a space assuming that I know, right, or have the solution to the problem. I like to go into spaces and work with the people in the space to solve the solution. So again, it's kind of looking back at these things and always like carrying it up. So I think that like now I understand why I've been doing these things.
Yeah. So are you inspired to, like, what do you think is next in terms of where your work's going to go, or what kind of work you're going to do, sort of thing?
I mean, I want to definitely expand on the show and like continue creating work from my grandfather's work. But I think now, like I have this, I want to explore like the matriarchy of my family, and like my grandmother, my mother, and all the great women in my life that have also influenced me. So I think it would be really cool to kind of explore that side too, and see where that kind of leads me.
Yeah. You've talked about just that rich discovery when you're going through all the photos and kind of getting to know your father and grandfather in a different way.
Yeah.
Has this helped you understand your community in a better way? Do you feel like you had new windows or insights into the Twin Cities in the 1970s or before or after?
I mean, I guess it kind of like it was cool in the sense of seeing like the changes that the city has, but I think for myself and a lot of my friends and family members, we're already so actively involved in community organizing, whether it's me designing things for different organizations like community or Million Artist Movement. So we're actively involved in the community. So I think that like I've always kind of been in tune to like the things that are happening or like how like social justice issues influence the art that I'm doing or things of that nature. But so we've kind of always existed, I think, in that space. So for me, it's kind of easy to walk that line.
Yeah, great. If you can encapsulate it in kind of a summary, what do you hope guests in the museum take away from your exhibit?
I want people to really think about their own lives and their own family and like what they're doing, to kind of preserve these legacies, or maybe they're creating something new, right? Like it doesn't need to, especially with, like there are some famous people in the exhibit, but I really wanted it to make it less about like famous people, famous places, and more about like everyday life, right? And think about like what we are doing now to kind of create these lasting legacies or these traditions or creating our own culture, right? And how like little things that we do may plant seeds for somebody else. So just kind of be present and reflect on your own life and like what that means and what your legacy might be. And it doesn't need to be something like grand. I think oftentimes we think that it has to be that, but it doesn't, Again, I didn't know when my father took me to that museum and I begged him for that print that would change my life. I didn't know, but we need to do those things and be mindful of like these everyday things that we're doing could potentially change our lives or the lives of somebody around us. So I think for me, that's the biggest takeaway, is just to kind of reflect on your life and think about like how your past has affected your present and where you're going in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the things I love about your exhibit is we've been having a series, as Pam indicated, of exhibits focused on the Black community in South Minneapolis, but very policy focused, like the policy of racial segregation, the highway policy, and things like that. And we always try to inject human stories into those, but what I love about what you've done upstairs is it's really bringing out just day-to-day life and people and how they're interacting with those bigger themes.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, I think that's equally as important, because I don't think that the Black experience or the experience for people of color is just trauma. Yes, we've been through that, but there's so much more. So it's important, especially for me and the work that I do, to again, plant seeds or show things in a different light, right? Because I think that's powerful. I kind of ignored my artistic side, right, for a very long time. Part of just me ignoring it or not thinking it's cool. But again, if we can see ourselves in a different lens and doing different things in everyday life, I think that it adds value and it brings more power to it, and it lets other people know that we're human, right? Like our story isn't trauma. Like effed up things happen to everybody. We may have we may have had to go through more obstacles, but that's not our story. That's not it. Every day we are everyday people, and I think that even if we look at like our political heroes or our community leaders, the everyday people are the ones that lift them up and put them in a position of power. So for me, they are just as important.
yeah, that's great.
If not more important.
That's great. I want to open it up to the room, because I'm guessing that a a lot of you have thoughts and questions. And yes, Mr. Griffin.
I worked with your granddad for a lot of years, and we did a lot of things together. We exhibited together.
Yep.
And after he passed, I contacted your Uncle Ben, and I asked him what did he plan on doing with those images, you know? And he said, "Oh, well, we'll get around to working on it, we'll get around." I'm so happy that you decided to take on that project.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I often think about that, and like, I don't know, I feel blessed and honored that they thought of me to do that. And I think that, again, it kind of all happened organically, right? Like, it was meant to be. Like, it was just sitting in boxes for so long that everything's timing, right? Like, I didn't have to force it. I had the stuff, but everything aligned, and it was meant to happen when it happened. So I'm feel very blessed to be able to, I hope, do it justice, you know?
Anybody else have question, thought, something to share?
Yes.
I was, when I was looking at your exhibit upstairs, I was thinking that it would be so wonderful if some people who were in those photos 30 or 40 years ago could see the exhibit and be able to pick themselves out of the crowd and so, oh my God, I'm in an exhibit.
Right.
We haven't started to grapple with this. This came out, we had a little reception for friends and family on Thursday, and this is going to create, I can tell already, for native, like people who've lived in South Minneapolis forever, this is going to spark memories and thoughts, and I think we need to think about how to capture those somehow.
I definitely do. I think that you asked like what's next. I think that might be next, is trying to identify some of this. I know like there's a picture of Mahmoud El-Kati upstairs, and I found his email, like I believe he's still working at McAllister, and I tried to reach out to him, and I invited him to the show, so I think that would be cool. And then even I was going through one of the slides with my aunt. She's like, "Oh, I believe that's Sharon Sales Belton." So already people are starting to identify who some of these things are. So yeah, I think that would be, like, I think that's kind of the next step, is identifying some of this, and then you know.
Anyone else? The other Mr. Hill, can I put you on the spot? What's it like to be in this moment and a bridge, if you will, between your father and your son, and how that all plays?
You know, I guess I feel honored and very proud that he has taken on this task. As he mentioned, those images were passed around for years before somebody tackled them. I mean, I'm glad that he did. Yeah, I deeply moved by the show.
Nice.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, I think, I mean, I believe, like, you know, I think as parents, right, we often forget how we're so in the grind of raising our children that we kind of forget that they do look up to us, right, and that we are kind of their first heroes. So I feel just as honored to be able to thank my father and grandfather for kind of planting these seeds, you know, because they are such a big influence in my life, and I don't think that, like, we often get a chance to thank them enough, and to be able to do that, I think is super powerful for me, and I'm very honored. So,
Is this this is either like potentially cliche, so apologize for that. You've got two young daughters.
I do, yes.
Has it changed your thought about how you're going to pass on legacies to them? Too soon.
Too soon. Yeah, I don't want them to grow up. But no, I mean, I think what it does is it makes you notice, like, how, like, what they're doing now, or their little personalities are developing, and you can see parts of yourself in them. So I think that for me, as a parent of having two young daughters, that's kind of like a cool thing, you know, to see that, and especially at the age they are, they're 13 and 8, almost 9, right? Their personalities are really starting to come into bloom. So you can see those little like sides of myself and my wife in them. That I think that's cool.
That's fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going through so many pictures,
Mm-hmm.
so many images, so many. Were the ones that come up that made a really personal, emotional impact on you because you remember the subject, you remember the place?
Yeah, I mean, really all of it. But I think like some of the hardest images were of my Uncle Chris, who passed away. And before he passed away, he came out to New York to visit, and I didn't get to see him. I missed him, and that has always kind of been hard for me. He did leave me a gift, and I still have it. So like seeing that, or like my Aunt Frances, who at family reunions was like the life of the family reunion. She would bring super soakers and water balloons and would just play with us like we were kids. So to see images of that, it brings you back, and it stings, but then it's good to know that you have these memories, right? And that you have this collection of stuff. So I think that it's been kind of like a very like a roller coaster of emotions,
Yep.
But yeah, I think like especially like those two, and then even like my my grandpa's brother Robert, he also passed away recently, and he couldn't get to be at the opening, and that like when I found out he passed away, that really took a life out of me, because it was like he asked me to do something with his brother's work, and I have, and he didn't get to actually see it actualized. So I think that was kind of hard, but again, just got to kind of like, keep moving.
Yep.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
Well, I'm your wife, so. Oh, no. We talk about this a lot, so like a lot of these conversations we've had, but like it was really exciting for me to see it all, come to life, and I can't tell you how excited I was about like the Angela Davis one, because like Black books, you have like pictures of famous people like in your house, like my grandpa, you got like Obama and stuff, so I was like, oh, it's like just like a picture, and that was like your grandpa took that picture. It was really exciting. Just to discover all those things. Do you want to talk a little bit too about some of the older photos that you also found too? Because we found some really old photographs and like other family things, and not all of them were ones that he took, but it was like kind of uncovering like even further back some of the history, and then some of the conversations that have come from family members and like other things we've learned about your own history. Sorry.
We have time.
We do have time. Yeah, I think. Oh man, where do I start? No, I mean, like, I think that, like, again, there's so many photos, right? That it's like, and you discover something new every day, right? And I think that I was over at my father's house a few weeks ago, and they even brought down like some photos from like the late 1800s, early 1900s, and of relatives, and so that was really cool, right? It's like you're actually like I said, you're like, not only am I doing like mental excavation of things like artifacts, but it's like finding this stuff. And then I sat down and I went, because I've always been kind of curious about my family tree, and I know that my Uncle David has kind of started that. But the thing about my family, right, is like I have 10 brothers and sisters. My dad has 10 brothers and sisters. My grandpa also has, 10 brothers and sisters, I believe. So big family, right? And
That's a lot of super soakers.
right? So like it kind of like it's hard, right, as it goes further back. But one thing that I thought was cool is like I lived in New York at one point in time. My grandfather was out there shooting in New York. I have aunts and uncles that lived out in New York. So it was like, it's cool. It's like these generations now removed, are living in these same places. My sister now is living in Denver, and I found out that one of our great relatives somehow migrated to Denver, and it was cool because like this was way back, early, late 1800s, maybe 1900s. They were in Denver, and I found the address, and then now my sister is like living there, so it's like we're kind of following these same like little routes. But then also my uncle was talking to me about like how he heard stories of our family like traveling across the country on these routes that like indigenous people and black people could travel without having to experience like the white militia or the white people. They could get across the country on these routes without ever encountering these people. And it made me wonder, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of these green books that they used to have. I think that those routes are what turned into the green books. So it's these narratives being passed down and these routes being passed down in these places that somebody eventually like wrote down and created these green books. So I think that was kind of cool, discovering some of that, or like me doing my own little investigative thing, because again, like a lot of times it's interpreted, you don't really know, even as you're uncovering like artifacts and things. You have an idea of what it was used for, but it's just our interpretation of it, right?
Yeah.
So it's my interpretation of what that meant. But so to kind of like know how we kind of migrated, I thought that was cool. And then he showed me, he took a DNA test, and it went and showed that some of our ancestors come from Sierra Leone. So that was another like affirming piece of like, wow, like piece of the puzzle that was missing, I can check off now, So I think that like discovering those things was very cool throughout the process, and I think it's still ongoing. I know that like I didn't get to talk to everybody, in my family that I wanted to, because I really wanted to like interview them and just learn more about my grandpa and like his story and our family story. But I think now that the exhibit is out, like that stuff will start to come out,
Yeah.
which is cool, and I'm excited for that.
Yeah, that's great.
Did that answer your question, Laura? Oh, should I? Okay.
So Daren, I wanted to ask you,
Yeah.
As you were contemplating putting your exhibit together and working on it, I wondered if you picked up some skills or training through your MCAD entrepreneurial degree about dealing with the pressure of your art represents you, but this exhibit represents your family.
Right.
And then it represents the community.
Right.
And then it represents Minneapolis. And then it represents, it's like ripples in a pond. And I can't imagine dealing with that pressure. So how do you deal with that?
I take things as they come, right? Like I said, even with this, I didn't want to see the questions, Like I feel like I work best when like I can just navigate what's happening, right? You overthink things sometimes, or you second guess yourself. So I think that comes back. Fast forward to other hobbies. Like when I was younger, I used to do BMXing, right? Extreme sport. So I think that kind of trained my mind to let go of things and not second guess it. Because like when you're doing a trick, right, or you're going off a jump and you second guess yourself, that's when you crash, right? You just got to have confidence. But it's also confidence in timing and knowing, right? Knowing that sometimes your intention is going to have a greater impact, and being able to deal with that ambiguity. I think that's where some of that like entrepreneurial stuff comes from, right? Because being an entrepreneur is peaks and valleys, right? But it's figuring out a way to survive when you're going down right into the valley again. And I think that is all can kind of condition me. And then being, smack dab in the middle of having 10 brothers and sisters, right? Like that kind of forces you to get a foothold whenever things come at you. So
Where are you in birth order, by the way?
Oh man, I think I'm smack dab in the middle.
As am I. I'm in the middle of 7.
Okay.
So yeah, how have your siblings been relating to you delving into these stories?
It's Okay, we have had some intense conversations, you know, it was some of it me relaying information and then them fact checking me, and I'm like, don't shoot the messenger, I'm just giving you what I've been told, you know. So there's been a little bit of back and forth, but I think overall that like, I feel like they're proud, you know, I haven't heard anything else. And I think that it was important for me to like, upstairs I have a scrapbook, so I tried to get, you know, my brothers and sisters, like input into the exhibit or like how they're feeling or what they thought about my grandpa. So not only is it just about me, it's about them too. So I tried to include them. The only one that I didn't get was my older brother, but it's okay because he's in one of the images. You know? So
Great.
yeah.
Yeah, Pam, I think, has a few more words. I want to thank you again, Daren, for bringing this to us in the museum and sharing it with the community. It's a treasure, I think.
Thank you for allowing me to share my vision. You know?
And before I hand it back to Pam, this might be more of a Laura thing than a you. You tell me. Tell us a little bit about this afternoon and the quilting project and what. Oh, did she step up?
Okay.
You got to do it.
Yeah, so if you go upstairs in the hallway right before the exhibit, there's a Million Artist Movement Power Tree quilt. So from like 1 to 3 after this, they're going to be in here creating like a power tree quilt. So viewers or people that have been in the artist talk can sit and create these quilt squares that kind of reflect on maybe the show or the artist talk or how you view the community. And what they do is they then put these in community spaces. So some of them have been shown at George Floyd Square. Some of them are in different schools around the city. I think they may even have a few in the Rondo Library. So they do a lot of these quilt squaring events to kind of bring the community closer. And then who doesn't like to be creative, right? Or like just doodle on something and then see it turn into something beautiful, right? So that's what's happening next.
So stick around. This is not by total accident, but nice serendipity again. This has become the year of art here at Hennepin History Museum. So we've got an art exhibit behind us. If you haven't checked that out, check that out from our collection in the 20th century. But Alyssa Thede, our curator who wasn't able to be here today, we've been reflecting on how your exhibit, we didn't imagine how it would work with Family in Pieces right next to it, but they really interact in a fun way. So spend some time there, stick around to make a little quilt square so that we can have a Hennepin History Museum quilt thing. So, Pam, final words?
So, Daren, thank you very much for your time. John, thank you. Those were great questions. So whenever we have the opportunity to have someone come in and share specifically about their exhibit, I think it just brings alive the exhibit itself. And so thank you. I think that it just totally kind of opened up my mind. It helped me understand it more. I hope it did that for you as well. And like I said in the opening, go out, tell everybody to come in and check it out. We want to make sure that folks understand and know that this is a place where they can come in and see and learn. That's one of the things that's really helpful for me being the president here at the museum, is that I've been exposed to so much and I've learned so much, and it's because of having folks like Daren come and share their stories. And so when I learn from the people who are actually telling their stories, the thing that I really take away from what you shared today is that piece about legacy. And the legacies that we're learning about folks' stories and about Daren's story and your family's legacy, I think that's key and I think that's important. And it's true about how it's connected to the legacies and the stories that we had here when we were talking about the Hale exhibit that just went away, and the other stories about South Minneapolis that we're telling about 35W and the story about that with owning up. And so all these threads that we're telling and the stories that we're telling at Hennepin History, I want you to go out and tell everybody to come here and hear the stories that we're telling, the legacies that we're sharing here at the museum. So I want to thank the members that are here today for coming and hearing Daren's story, and I want to invite anyone who's not a member to become a member. Join this museum and hang out with us more often, all right? So please thank Daren for being here today and join the museum.
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, we've got an exhibit upstairs called Family in Pieces, which inspired us to start thinking about, should we create a project about family history? And we didn't brand Bond Between Us yet as part of Radical Roots, but I think we're gonna, as we start to promote over the coming year, do that. We're trying to inspire people to think about family history in new ways. So you've got 2 exhibits now that give you different views of how artists can interact with their family history. But Rosella reminds me too, we've got a memory lab downstairs. So part of Daren's process was going into our memory lab and scanning some of these photos from his family. What the memory lab does is take anything you can find from your family history and give you a chance to put it in digital format.